Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Greater Cambridge Partnership Executive Board. My name is Neil Goff. I wish to just start this meeting with an announcement that it is by convention of the way in which the Greater Cambridge Partnership operates that the chair of the Joint Assembly and the chair of the board are different political parties, which I'm now stepping down as the chairman of the board, which will also enable the continuity of joint assembly meetings chaired by people called Tim, which is been quite recently established but is long-standing. So I will therefore step down. Thank you. And therefore, I think I probably should ask for nominations for a new chairperson.
Can I nominate Councillor Machini?
And I would be very happy to second that. Do we have it? I think there's no other nominations. So, Councillor Machini, I'm going to pass you that.
Thank you very much appreciated, and thank you so much. I should say this now. Thank you so much, Neil, for the excellent job that you've done chairing the last meeting. Excellent example for me to follow. I hope I do it justice. And I do believe, since I'm now chair, that we do need a vice chair. So if I could please have nominations for that.
Councillor Goff.
Which I will be very happy to second, assuming I can. Is there anything else? In which case, Neil, you can have this. Oh, this is brilliant. Thank you very much for that, and I am thankful very much in advance for all the help and support I will no doubt get from you. In which case, shall we start with a few welcoming remarks? I would like to welcome the new Business Board representative, Austin Adams, to this meeting of the board, and I would also like to welcome the substitute Business Board member, Dr. Andy Williams, who joins us from previously being a member of the Joint Assembly. We had discussion last time. The chair uses their discretion to allow both the Business Board representative and their substitutes to continue to attend the board. And this is why we have the pleasure of having both of them with us today. Also, I have seen Mayor Dr. Nick Johnson walk through the door, so thank you very much for coming. We also welcome you as a non-voting member of this board. Thank you very much for being with us today, as we recognize the role of the combined authority as the strategic transport authority for the area where we are. I suppose it is now time for recognizing at this point the Histon Road Residents Association has given us a copy of this book, which we receive gratefully as a celebration of the memories of local people. And this book was launched earlier in the month at an exhibition of work by documentary photographer Farouk Kara. So we welcome this very gratefully, and it's a very good thing that we're doing this today, as Histon Road has now reopened to traffic in both directions, as I was able to notice as I was coming up it myself just earlier. So before we carry on, I was just going to report that, compared to the agenda that you've got in front of you, we're going to vary the order very slightly. We will take item 9 after item 11. This is to enable Mayor Johnson to be here for the for the discussion of the city access debate, which we think is going to be of particular relevance to him. And he needs to leave by 5, so hopefully we'll be done with that by then. So I hope that this is fine for everybody. We will now therefore start the actual meeting. Are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. No, there are no apologies for absence.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Nick. Are there any declarations of interest on the items on today's agenda? None. If you think of anything at any point during the meeting, please shout. You can declare an interest at any point. Now, minutes of the previous meeting. Can anybody confirm the accuracy of the minutes that were circulated?
Chair, just one point on page 5. I think, Austin, we're misspelling your name. There's an E rather than an I.
Excellent. Thank you very much for noting that. I hope I don't make that mistake myself in the future. Is it therefore okay for me to sign the minutes as a correct record? Which I will do. Should I do it now? Excellent, in which case I will do it afterwards. And we should now proceed to item 6. The chairperson is hereby reporting that the Business Board has nominated Claire Ruskin to replace Dr. Andy Williams on the Joint Assembly. And as required by the standing orders, we do need the board to endorse this appointment. So I am going to ask, is there any question about that? None is heard, and therefore shall I take it that we have endorsed this appointment? Fantastic, thank you very much. Moving swiftly to item 7, which is questions from members of the public. You are on page 45 of your agenda now. There have been 9 public questions relating to agenda items for today. 1 question was received on agenda item 9, the quarterly progress report. 4 questions were received on item 10, city access, and 4 questions were received on item 11, the emergency traffic regulation orders. We have published details of these questions on the website, and the executive board has seen them. And the people who were asking these questions have been offered the option to either come here, attend this meeting and ask us in person, or have the questions read out on their behalf. We will take each of these questions at the beginning of the relevant agenda item. I'm assuming that's all fine, which means we go on to item 8, which is feedback from the Joint Assembly. Councillor Tim Bick, whom we welcome, is in attendance as the chair of the Joint Assembly, and he will provide an overview of the meeting that was held on the 9th of September. I would like to formally thank Councillor Bick for his report and ask if he would prefer, given the structure of today's meeting, to present his report now or to present a separate report before each agenda item.
Sorry about that. Thanks very much, Chair. I would be very happy if you took the written report as read at this stage, and I would like to make some comments in support of it when we get to items 10 and 11. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I do believe that would be very good for us in terms of timely getting to the items that are of interest to the Mayor here. We are now, therefore, based on what I said previously, going to move on to item 10 of the agenda, which is the public transport improvements and city access strategy. We are now on page 81 of your agenda pack. The report is being introduced, I believe, by Peter? Excellent, in which case we will take public questions on this item now. Can I invite Wilma, please, to read out the first questions received by Linda and Sharon?
Yes, Chair. The questions are as follows. The first question is from Linda Worth, County Access and Bridleways Officer of the Cambridgeshire British Horse Society, and reads as follows. We endorse the statement at 4.5, which highlights the need for leisure access for all active travel modes. The GCP must be congratulated on its forward-thinking proposals within the CSETS project for a green bridleway alongside the bus route with links into the existing public rights-of-way network, and for the greenways proposals, if not their actual delivery thus far. Recognising the need for flexibility and the inclusion of provision for leisure journeys in this post-pandemic approach, will the board confirm its continued support of providing safe, appropriately surfaced transport corridors for all active travellers in line with the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough local transport plan's definition of active travel, walkers, cyclists and horse riders? Whilst we support the creation of safe space for walking and cycling, referenced in paragraph 7.11, this must be extended to all active travellers, including equestrians, particularly in semi-urban and rural locations, and on routes which link communities or the public rights-of-way network. This board has previously been advised of the danger created for equestrians by on-road cycle lanes and the consequences of extinguishing the right of equestrians to use safe verges when shared cycle-pedestrian paths are created. Will the board please confirm that the safety of all active travellers, walkers, cyclists and horse riders will be considered equally in the space reallocation proposals? This next question is from Councillor Sharon Dents of Rampton Parish Council. Looking at the current plan for bus services in the agenda papers, I can see no plan to include Rampton in any of the proposed routes or even a recognition of its existence on the maps. Leaving the village with absolutely no public transport options is clearly unacceptable at a time when we are trying to reduce emissions, get people to leave cars at home and encourage people into the city. To that end, I wonder whether the ambitions of the Transport Delivery Programme for South Cambridgeshire considers smaller isolated villages. Can Rampton and other smaller villages have any confidence that there will be a bus service, even with the public transport improvements being discussed? The vision will fail if the focus is solely on larger villages, thereby condemning people living in villages like Rampton to be largely car dependent. Buses at peak times need to be offered, making a viable service which will then be supported. Could some of these options be provided to improve the situation in line with the Mayor's position and the GCP's mission to increase use of public transport into the city? A little creative thinking could unlock real benefits. The City 8 pauses in Cottenham on Lambs Lane. Instead of idling there, could it not use that time to circle down to Rampton, round the Green and back up to collect Rampton residents? Could some of the guided buses come off the busway at Long Stanton, pick up through Willingham, Rampton and Cottenham, returning onto the busway at Oakington, thereby providing access to the busway for all three parishes? Could a request bus stop and cycle track racking be provided at the end of Reynolds Drove in Rampton, like the one at Fendrayton Lakes? This would cause minimal disruption to the expressway, but be of huge benefit to the residents of Rampton. Currently, Rampton has no public service and no amenities in the village, so parishioners have no option but to resort to using multiple cars and taxis. The very limited and sporadic provision of a bus service over the years has led to a lack of trust, so when parishioners are planning access to employment, education, healthcare and other essential activities such as shopping and socialising, they inevitably buy a car. In a time when it is essential we reduce emissions and increase the use of public transport, these issues need to be addressed in our smaller villages. My question is, can smaller villages like Rampton be confident that they will benefit from the public transport vision in this agenda item if they are not even worthy of a dot on the map? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much for that, Vilma, which means, Edward, would you like to come forward and ask your question now?
Thank you, Chair. So with the exception of the recommendation to co-fund 30 electric buses, which though desirable will do nothing for modal shift, it seems that none of the Office of Recommendations will lead to change on the ground within the next 12 months. The proposals, which have been 6 years in the making, are still highly conceptual, with critically important foundation work still ongoing, even for measures that are relatively uncontroversial. including designing the future bus network, designing a complete in-city cycle network, revising the road network hierarchy, developing an integrated parking strategy, installing citywide smart traffic signals and integrated control systems, implementing an ultra-low emission zone, and locating logistics hubs to promote efficient, low-emissions deliveries. The future bus network does not propose any changes to city centre bus routes, even though it is clear that changes will be needed, both to reduce conflicts with people walking and cycling and to create additional capacity for the planned expansion in bus services. So our questions to the board are, will the GCP formally evaluate ideas proposed by Smarter Cambridge Transport, bus operators and any other groups for reconfiguring city bus routes to increase capacity, facilitate interchange and improve safety? And from which budgets will local authorities fund the expansion in bus services, estimated at £40 million per year, until the proposed flexible charge produces sufficient surplus revenue to cover it? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward. Next on my list is Martin, if you'd like to come forward.
Good afternoon. Just by way of introduction, my name is Martin Lucas-Smith. I'm one of the trustees and volunteer members of CamCycle, the Cambridge Cycling Campaign. Through the chair, it's lovely to meet you all. Once again, we thank officers for the responses to our questions at the Joint Assembly. Given the many risks from a car-based recovery from COVID and the deepening climate and health crises, we remain concerned about the slow timescale. For instance, Bath's Clear Air Zone has been in operation since March this year. Oxford's Zero Emission Zone will be implemented in February 2022, and the London Ultra-Low Emission Zone will be expanded next month. So our city is way behind in its plans. We've been told that the city access plans will reduce traffic to the point where the road space could be used for something different. For example, space for pedestrians, people cycling, and very importantly, space for bus routes. However, CamCycle believes that action on safe streets cannot wait for a flexible charge to be in place. Measures that will help as many people as possible to have the choice to switch from driving to active travel must be prioritised now to support the overall goals of the city access scheme and the proposed bus improvements. Therefore, our questions are, point 4.4 talks about integrating a residents' parking strategy with a livable neighbourhoods approach, so that parking is treated in the round. What's the timescale for this work? And how does the combined authorities' expression of interest for Mini Holland funding, which we very much welcome, include any areas in Greater Cambridge? Secondly, we still don't have an answer on what the revised network hierarchy mentioned in point 7.9 refers to. Previous papers have suggested it was scheduled for adoption in 2022. When will this hierarchy be published? Thirdly, what progress has been made on the workplace travel scheme and the city centre freight pilot referred to in the baseline package, as in 7.11? And lastly, we've seen the real benefit of experimental schemes from the active travel ETROs, agenda item 10. What's happened to the idea of car-free days proposed as part of the baseline interventions in February 2020? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, and it was very nice to meet you too. I do believe it's now time for Peter to answer these questions. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the question from Linda Worf, the Greater Cambridge Partnership is making a significant investment in the active travel network across Greater Cambridge, over £150 million over the life of the city deal, and this will be delivered in line with the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Local Transport Plan. Where space allocation or reallocation proposals exist, the safety of all users will be considered as appropriate to the location and the type of scheme as board members would expect. In terms of Councillor Dence's question around the bus proposals, so the bus proposals set out in the report significantly enhance the provision of services across rural areas. Many of the proposals will move some of the villages from a daily bus service to an hourly bus service. It's intended that where there are smaller settlements or smaller villages, we'll be looking to plug in to the main network either by connecting bus services, using travel hubs, or indeed building on the experience of the Combined Authority and their demand responsive service that they've launched in West Huntingdonshire, or will be launched in West Huntingdonshire next month. We will clearly pass the sort of the detailed of Councillor Dence's questions to colleagues at the Combined Authority, and we'll welcome working with her through the proposed consultation should the board be minded to move it forward. In terms of the question from Edward Lee, the question just fails to appreciate the growth challenge in this area, the necessity of new infrastructure that needs to be sustainably focused, and the progress that's been made in the recent past on progressing those schemes. The paper sets out a clear process for taking forward a further set of work around city access, and the proposals contained in there are transformational, which is the reason why it is necessary to consult people and listen to their views on the proposals that are outlined. Clearly, the proposals are seeking to double the bus network. That will have an impact in the tight city centre and indeed across the city, and we will continue to work with bus operators, colleagues of the Combined Authority and others in terms of that final design. And indeed, if we go out to a public consultation, if the board is minded, then we will be listening to stakeholders and residents in terms of doing that. If a sustainable source of funding can be secured for the medium term to deliver on this bus network, then city deal funding can be used in the short term to make sure there is a kickstart to these services. And that will be important consideration for the board to reflect as we take this paper forward. In terms of Martin's question, a similar starting point in terms of the comparisons with Bath and Oxford, I would say that actually we've got a clear plan, and also the proposals contained in this report are far more ambitious than both Bath and Oxford, and so there's a sort of context to that. In terms of the sort of detailed questions that you asked, we're in active discussions with colleagues of the County Council on residence parking, and we're hopeful to make progress this year in terms of coming back on that. We're working closely with the Mayor and his officers on the Mini Holland expression of interest, which, as you say, is absolutely to be welcomed. We know that there's not a detailed location being decided or indeed being asked for at the moment, and we've been reassured by colleagues at the Combined Authority they'll be working to involve people in that. The current classification of the Cambridge's road network dates back to the 1980s. So we are working with county colleagues to review that classification. I expect to be consulting upon that in the relatively early part of 2022, and I'm sure that will engender a deal of discussion, and we welcome CamCycle's involvement in that process. The workplace cycle parking scheme will be launched next month. The feasibility study on freight is ongoing, and we hope to report in the near future. And finally, in terms of car-free days, I mean, you'll know that we were very supportive previously. Obviously, in light of government guidance around the pandemic and the use of public transport, that's been put on hold. But subject to the pandemic being dealt with in relatively short order now, then we'll be looking at proposals with County Council, Combined Authority and others for future years on car-free. I hope I've answered the questions there, Chair.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that. At this point, could we have some comments from the Assembly? Councillor Bick, is that a good time?
Chair, I'd be happier to comment after the report had been presented. If it would make more sense, I think, if that.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. As you prefer. I will amend my notes. In which case, we shall start the debate as follows. We will have a general introduction, which Peter will do, covering the aims of the paper and previous engagement, what we've done so far, and then we will outline the proposals relating to sustainable transport. the creating space, discouraging car use, and the next steps from today and the proposed timeline. So at this point, should Peter introduce the report? Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to give a brief overview and then hand over to Isabel to do the hard work on public transport. The board last considered city access in March. A lot has changed since March. We have a new mayor. We have a new agenda coming from the Combined Authority. A lot of change on the government agenda around the transport decarbonisation plan, around the national bus strategy, national walking and cycling policies. The Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Climate Commission proposals are really beginning to embed. And the priority for city access, you've discussed at your last meeting and was certainly discussed at the two previous joint assembly meetings. Public transport and city access sits at the heart of what we're doing. Clearly, there is a requirement to build additional sustainable infrastructure capacity, and that process is ongoing. Refocusing the urban area away from the private car is an essential component, making more space for people, be it pedestrians, cyclists, or just enhancing the public environment. We want cleaner air. We want to be actively and positively contributing to the climate challenge, not the other way around. And we need to work hand in glove with colleagues at the Combined Authority to support a transformation of the public transport agenda. So the proposals outlined today will put us on a trajectory to achieve that. The work that you've previously considered, and that has been extensive, has said that a package approach is required. There's not just one policy lever you can pull, and that's the magic answer. We do need to transform, not tinker with public transport. We need significant improvements in walking and cycling, and members will recall the Cycling Plus consultation that we've just gone through for extensive segregated cycle facilities across the city. And we need measures to discourage the use of the private car that allows for the space and, if possible, for the revenue to achieve all that. So extensive engagement has taken place previously, Citizen Assembly, Choices for Better Journeys, and I could go on. But there is a very clear context for that. I think now what we're moving into is far more detail around the public transport offer, and that's me hopefully effectively handing it over to Isabel.
Cool, thank you. So, as Peter said, this is about a transformation to the public transport network, and the work that's set out in the paper is based on work from Sistra, which we published in 2020, which used the findings of the Combined Authority Strategic Bus Review to suggest changes to the network that would offer many, many more people a competitive alternative to their car. And just to bring this to life a bit more, because I know that the diagram doesn't necessarily do justice to the scale of the change, it does mean most market towns and the larger villages having 6 direct services to Cambridge an hour instead of the usual 2 services, with more direct links to key employment sites such as CBC, the Science Park, West Cambridge, and also introducing express services that would cut up to 30 minutes off journey times. More rural villages, as we've heard, would go from having only a small number of services a day or even a week to an hourly service running into the evening. And within the city, there'd be more direct services to employment sites, as well as the train stations and kind of other local centres operating on at least a 10-minute frequency. And across the network, we're looking at services operating 5 a.m. to midnight, giving people the confidence to use the bus for the whole day's journeys. And we're looking at fares too. So the Combined Authority Strategic Bus Review found that a £1 flat fare in Cambridge City would see an extra 1.6 million journeys. Alternatively, a 25% reduction in Cambridgeshire would mean an extra 2.5 million journeys. So that sort of change means we're not just talking about the bus being a reliable and attractive alternative to the car, but an obvious choice for many people. And in this way, the proposals seek to align with the Mayor's agenda for securing comprehensive improvements to the local bus network. And the paper is clear that such a transformative network has a significant cost, potentially up to £40 million a year, depending on the level of changes to fares and services. And the GCP could forward fund some of that, but an ongoing revenue source is required, as we've heard. And so the proposed consultation will seek feedback from the public on the proposed bus network concept in detail, including views on fares, operating hours, and how the network could be funded and delivered. And the outcome of the consultation would then support work with the Combined Authority bus operators and other partners on the detailed design of the bus network. So in parallel, the paper does also set out how the GCP can work with operators and the combined authority to reduce bus emissions, and it seeks a contribution of £2.25 million to a bid that the combined authority have made to the Department of Transport for money for 30 electric buses, and that would obviously build on the GCP's initial electric bus pilot and see many, many more buses in the city, particularly in the air quality management area. So that's kind of me done on public transport.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Isabel. So we will have a little bit of debate now on what we've heard so far. So Tim, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Chair. I would like just to make some comments in relation to the Assembly discussion on this. First, to say that there is a strong consensus in the Assembly behind the need for a strategy which addresses the three evils of climate change, air pollution and congestion, which otherwise threaten health, environment and prosperity. There is general support for boldness in now grasping and advancing this strategy after it's been in the doldrums for what seems like too long. We agree that the measures adopted must change methods of travelling into and within the urban area without inhibiting access and for many improving it, and that they must be fair. The bottom line, as we slowly exit the COVID period and as our population continues to grow, must be fewer car journeys, a big shift in travel towards a much improved public transport system and active transport, tightly linked to a sustainable way of paying for this. The important thing to convey to the board is that the Assembly was unanimous in wanting the proposed consultation to go forward as proposed, the overwhelming majority believing it encompassed the right solutions to the challenges, only one member expressing reservations about that. There was therefore a coming together around a desire for the consultation to be as effective as it possibly can be. A range of points were made in that context, which are itemised in my written report and have been picked up in the officer's summary of it. I would like to highlight three of those. Firstly, the importance of clarity of overall benefit of the proposals, both within the city and outside it, against a backcloth of what would lie ahead in the future if action was not taken. Secondly, that the consultation needs to carefully address the relationship between funding sources and bus improvement, so that if you imagine we ask people about what sort of bus service improvements they'd like, I imagine we get a very long list indeed. That needs to correspond to the amount, to the measures that people are willing to support to help pay for that. And so the way the consultation is constructed does need to encourage people to make those trade-offs in the way they give their responses. And thirdly, that the consultation needs to reflect the full diversity of our public, needs to be fully representative, and I mean by that not only sort of socio-economically, but also geographically, and particularly to include the public in East Cambridgeshire, which is very close to Cambridge, as close as many parts of South Cambridgeshire, and there will be an important impact, I would argue, benefit in that area. So the call from the Assembly is to take this forward as a matter of urgency. It's the linchpin of our overall transport strategy and the necessary corollary of many of the projects that we've already committed to, and it's really time to make progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that. Before I bring any other members of the board, I was going to ask if Mayor Dr. Nick would like to make any comments at this point.
I would.
Which is great that he signalled to me what I was hoping he would do. Go ahead.
Okay. So well done. Thank you. Me actually sitting here, even though I was late, caught in traffic, coming through the centre of Cambridge, is deliberate to kind of make the point that the combined authority has to work very closely with the Greater Cambridgeshire Partnership. And as alluded to already in some of what we said, I do think the two organisations are beginning to work very well. There's a tenet of the 3 Cs that I talked about, cooperative working. And I also believe we're also demonstrating the most important C, the aspect of compassion and how we want to kind of really care for our individuals, care for our communities, and care to make a difference around our environment. So I just wanted to highlight a few things that I felt that the report has managed to do and to essentially just continue to show my support. It's very clear we have a big growth challenge in the sort of the greater Cambridge area. It's significant further afield as well. But we do, as people have already indicated, with the big challenge of the worsening in the environment, the climate, we need more people walking, we need them cycling, and we need them, most importantly, taking public transport and moving away from a reliance on the car. As a doctor, and one of the reasons I actually decided to go into this crazy world of politics is because I wanted to make a difference. I've said it many, many times through Marmot reviews and the like, is that the things about the environment around you are what actually affects your general health, a lot more than your local hospital and the quality of your NHS care. That can be as good as you want. But if you live in environments or in communities where the air quality is poor, you will suffer. And I cannot stand by when I know that there are examples in this country now where air quality is put down as something that is an additional factor in the cause of death of children. And as a children's doctor, it's for me, as I've said, no more. So we need better public transport, and we need to make those competitive and responsive to the publics that we serve. There are so much more benefits than just apart from air quality and carbon emissions. It just also gives a community the opportunity to get to education opportunities, to work opportunities. But we does recognise that we're going to need to think about how we do that on already crowded roads and with the actual challenge of the revenue. So things have changed in terms of what was originally planned by the previous mayor. And we need to start thinking transformationally, as we say here. And I believe this document does that. It outlines a process, one which I think I made very clear in my campaign, and as I have done ever since I came into this post, that the buses were going to be an important part of dealing with the problem. It doesn't exclude the idea of the importance of active travel, but I always thought, ideally, zero-emission buses would be the thing that could improve things across not just Cambridge, Greater Cambridge, but across the whole of Cambridge from Peterborough. And when I look at this report, where we're talking about longer hours, higher frequencies, more direct orbital connections as part of a core network, the improved city and rural connections, enhanced park and ride services, targeted lower free fares or lower fares for all. I said it before, a kid for a quid sounds very, very appealing to myself. And most importantly, those cleaner and greener vehicles. I am sold on this report. So I'm not a voting member, but I want you to know that as the leader of the combined authority and with the team that I'm working with, I'm grateful for the work that's been done. We're moving forward in terms of the combined authority, in terms of a new, refreshed local transport and connectivity plan. I'm very, very much wedded to the ideas that are within this organisation, within this report. They will very closely align to what we expect to come out of the combined authority. And I think, as I've always said, this is a report that hits the 3 Cs. It's both compassionate, it's cooperative, and it delivers for the community. And most importantly, it improves public health and the environment and goes along with the 31 recommendations that my board suggested we should follow from Baroness Brown. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Dr. Nick, for those very welcome comments. I very much enjoyed listening to them. Are there any more comments? Just to focus your attention, we are now talking more specifically about paragraph 7.4 to 7.8 of the papers in front of us. Are there any comments from the rest of the board about that at this point? I am looking around. Shall I start with? Excellent. I shall start with Austin then. No, Dave, sorry. Oh, in which case, Dave.
Thank you. First of all, I have to declare that I'm a member of Cambridge Cycling Campaign. I forgot to do that. I always do.
Something's happened to your mic, Dave, I think. Try again.
Hello, Mike.
There you go.
The £40 million that we are talking about as necessary to support a bus network, could we break that down a bit? Does that mean that everything on the bus network would actually be free, or does that predispose a fare of a certain amount? I'd like to hear that broken down, please.
Excellent, thank you for that. Austin, did you want to speak, or did I not see your hand? Please do. I think the mic is off, though. Mic.
There we go. I very much welcome it from a business perspective. And there are a couple of points that flow from it, I think, worthy of note. I'm a great believer in not letting perfection get in the way of progress. And I think other people have commented that we've been at the formulation stage for quite a long time, and we've got further steps to go through. The world has clearly changed in recent times, and it's appropriate that we do that. But to really make progress, we need speed and we need compromise. There's clearly a complex problem that we're trying to solve. There are many, many different dimensions to it. And at the end of the day, there's no perfect solution. But let's not let the continuous debate and twists and turns and iterations of reviewing and arguing get in the way of making progress. We will not get everything perfectly right, I'm sure. But we can make it much, much better than it is at the moment. So, my plea is let's get on with it. I think it's an aggressive timeline for the consultation, and I would hope that people would be sympathetic and supportive of the need to get our shoulder behind it, and try and make a difference.
That is fantastic. Thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a few comments which I hope will pick up some of the questions which we've heard as well. So, I think Mr. Lee expressed some sort of concern about the sort of time all this is taken. I think we also heard from Tim Bick as well at the Assembly the sort of degree of urgency as well. I think let's be clear and honest with everyone that the most important thing about the meeting of the Joint Assembly was the degree of consensus in that meeting. It wasn't unanimous, as Tim said, but there was a higher degree of consensus there than has been experienced before. And we've also heard from Mayor Johnson as well, his views, which also adds to that degree of consensus and common understanding and purpose, which I think is really significant, and we shouldn't let that Joint Assembly meeting go and Mayor Johnson's comments go without acknowledging that, because that is in some ways a bit of the answer to Mr. Lee's very pertinent question. I'll just make a couple of other comments on the question. I need to declare that my ward includes Rampton, and I welcome Councillor Dent's this question, and for Mr. Blake, hot on the heels of the Cottenham question, which he's become very familiar with. The next manifestation of that will be the Rampton question. But I think it raises some very interesting points when we talk about what transformational means for bus services in particular. And, I know Rampton very well. It's it's not an insignificant village, but it has no public transportation whatsoever. And, going from no bus service to one every hour or one every 2 hours would be truly transformational. And when we think about what that means for young people, for example, that's really important. So as we go forward through this consultation, I think it is really important that we don't just focus on the larger communities, but we also think about all the communities. And as Councillor Bick said as well, that also extends to those which are outside the immediate Greater Cambridge area. I think the really important part of this is that I do understand this is not the next phase of the consultation. It's probably the phase of the consultation when we get detailed proposals, but we should certainly be making it clear to residents that at some point in the process, they will have an input into the details, because if we tap into the details, I also believe that we will find potentially small things which could make a big difference. Transformation doesn't always mean big ticket items. It can be something small which can be unlocked. The third thing I just wanted to say again was picking up on Edward Lee's comments about buses around Cambridge. I think you're right, and I've seen your sort of proposal about the looping round of the buses in Cambridge. It seems to me that that's not an uninteresting idea, and I would very much hope that that sort of idea as to how you deal with the increase in the number of buses coming into Cambridge is something we should be looking at. So I very much hope, and I'm sure you will, be contributing that to any consultation which goes forward. I think I'll stop there. I might come back later, but that's it.
Thank you very much. Phil, you wanted to speak next.
Thank you. Just very...
I should probably remind us that it's not far from 5 when Mayor Nick has to go, so we should probably... Oh, excellent, fantastic. Excellent. No, I would hate you to miss too much of this fantastic discussion so far. Phil, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not going to say a great deal because I'm fully supportive of the proposal and very much welcome the Assembly's input and comments. But there are two elements here that we all realise are going to be significant going forward. One's been mentioned, which is complexity, and two, the time taken, the need for some quick solutions. But I think, as already been said, we are not the first to do this kind of thinking. And I think in terms of reinventing the wheel, we should be looking at the experiences and the approaches of other places that have been through this. And I'm not beyond taking something off the shelf, frankly, to get that progress that we need on some of these questions. So what I would like to see in the consultation is some acknowledgement and some examples in there of where other places have looked at these kind of issues, their experiences, and when we next see this as well, some kind of analysis of, well, here are some options, and based on the evidence of other places as well, because to overcome the complexity, to assuage some of the fears about these the proposals, and to get some progress, I think we should be looking at the experiences of other places. So that's my plea, really.
That is brilliant. Thank you very much, Phil. Is there anybody else who would like to comment? I was just going to say one very short thing, which was, I'm not sat on this board for very long, but I've so far seen sort of public questions and interactions come in two forms. One of them is, why are you doing this thing? Stop doing it, don't do it. The other one is, we should be doing this thing more quickly. I know which one I prefer. So, I'm very heartened to hear that we have the public behind us. We really want to get this thing going, and there will be no looking back or laying blame as to why it's taken this bloody long. But I can promise you that we want it to be all wheels turning, or whatever the phrase is, for the future. So we hope to actually be really efficient and really quick and really get going with this. as much as we can. There was a question from Dave about breakdown of prices and fares and things. I will ask Peter in a moment to come back on it if he's got anything to say at this point. I suppose probably the general position is we don't know yet, but it's something definitely that we need to think about. So do you have anything about that, Peter? Or Isabel? Anyone?
Yep, so in terms of a breakdown, I think we've said previously that the improvements to the services themselves, in terms of kind of more services, more frequent, longer hours, more routes, that's around £20 million a year to do that. Looking at fares, I think if you wanted to kind of do some targeted interventions around lower fares for, you know, certain groups who find it hard to access public transport, you're looking at kind of £5 to £10 million a year. If you're looking at more like £20 million a year, which is kind of where you start to get to your 40 million a year figure, that's more like reductions across the board. I don't think it's really into free fares for all. That's a whole other kind of level of level of millions.
Excellent. So we should probably start on the next bit of this debate, which is, you know, sort of the creating space bit, which goes from 7.9 to 7.17 of the sections on your papers. Would you like to get us started on that, Peter?
Thank you, Chair. I think many members have already sort of touched on this already. I mean, obviously there are shorter-term work streams we're already ongoing with. Network hierarchy review, ETROs next on the agenda, integrated parking strategy, smart signals, civil parking enforcement in South Cambridgeshire and the like. What the second part of the paper focuses on are some of the considerations that this board and the Assembly's had previously, so paragraphs 711 to 717, or what really are the mechanisms for reducing and discouraging traffic within the city environment and the various pros and cons of that. Happy to reassure the board that extensive work has already been undertaken on the equalities issues, and that will be a key theme as we go through this process. That is not just the statutory equalities issues. It's feeling very Duxford-like. But also in terms of equality issues on people on lower incomes, on accessibility issues and the like, and that will continue to be a key theme. So finally, just to draw the board's attention to what you're agreeing to, it's not just a consultation in the autumn that brings this back in the early part of next year, but it is the roadmap that's outlined in paragraphs 724 to 727 to say over the next 12 or 18 months, there are a number of key milestones and key steps that we hope, with the board's support, we will be able to take that will deal with a number of the comments around timescales and aspirations and moving this forward in due course and good order. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that. Are there any questions or comments again at this point? Neil?
Yes, I just again want to reinforce a point which Councillor Bick made, which is in the consultation. The real success or otherwise of this consultation exercise, I think, is structuring it in such a way which the level of ambition is in step with the level of funding. And I'm sure the officers will be very alert to this, but we want from the participants to understand where they sit on those two things which are highly correlated. And consultation responses which says, I would love a great level of high-density bus services, but I dislike every way we have of funding them, is a non-helpful contribution. So somehow we need to structure it in a way that it is clear that those two things have to be linked. And I don't underestimate the challenge ahead of you doing that, but I'm sure you're on it, as they say.
I think we absolutely are. Dave, would you like to say something?
Chair, yes, a comment about realism, I suppose. I think it's very similar to what Councillor Goff was saying, but maybe a bit more blunt. If we are going to stop climate change, if we're going to reduce pollution, if we're going to make all these changes that we need to make so that our next generations can survive in a as good a planet, or nearly as good a planet as we have, then there has to be some giving up of the privileges that we've taken as norms. I think that there are a huge amount of people in Cambridge who are 100%, excuse me, 100% behind the idea that we need to walk and cycle. There's a huge body in Cambridge that supports that, and in Cambridgeshire. But there's also a body of people that believe that driving their car from doorstep to doorstep is a given right. And without trying to upset people, but being brutally honest, that given right has got to stop. I heard the best place to park your car is on your drive, and you leave it there, and you come to work by bus, by bike, or by walking. We've had an experience in Mill Road where we had virtually no traffic on Mill Road for over a year, and people gave up the usage of their cars, from Romsey in particular, and they walked and cycled into town. They did this for two reasons. One, because they couldn't use their cars, so that was the stick. But the carrot was that they got fitter and they arrived on time and they had a much more enjoyable journey. Now, we've seen the cars come back on Mill Road, and you only have to sit there, as I do most mornings, drinking coffee and watching Mill Road Bridge and seeing the way that cars go up the hill and overtake cyclists regardless of the position that they're in. Now, to achieve a greater cycling and active travel city, we have to take those cars off the road. We have to reduce the traffic in the city centre by as much as we can. Now, I appreciate that everybody needs a car sometimes. This is I'm not an anti-car lobby. I've got a car of my own, which I've used today because I'm not allowed to exercise today because I've had a tooth out. So I need a car today, but that car will go back on my drive and won't be used again. And I'm trying to bring a sense of realism to this, a down-to-earthness that we need to understand. If we are going to protect our children and our grandchildren, we have to be prepared to move. And people have to be prepared to compromise. Everything's not going to be the same as it was. I've heard an example today of two people leaving a spot and coming to this hall. One of them got here in 6 minutes. They came by bike. The other one took 30 minutes because their car was in use. This is the way that it is in Cambridge. You can guarantee your journey time. You can guarantee that you're going to get there. You can guarantee that you're going to be able to park if you come by bike. And I could just go on and on and on, but I'm going to stop at this point. I'm just trying to hoping that a message will go out to our residents, a message that we need to be thinking compromise. This is not a fight between the motor car and the push bike. This is a fight for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Dave. Is there anyone else who would like to make any comments? In which case, I think that we should... Is there any... Oh, excellent. In which case, there's nothing else that we should say about the timelines, anything like that? Brilliant. Fabulous. In which case, on behalf of the board, I am very pleased to sum up this discussion, having heard the great groundswell of support that we've got behind what we're doing today. It's an extremely important thing we're trying to do. And I will reiterate some of the things that Councillor Bick told us from the Assembly. We need to make it very clear to people going forward what we're doing and what we're doing it for, and how everything will work in the areas that we're looking at, how every community is different, how everybody's social, economic and geographic conditions are different. And with that in mind, we're going to kickstart this process by, I hope, agreeing to the following recommendations, A, B, and C, that you have on your papers. I hope I don't need to read them out. We should all have them in front of us. Now, we have 3 voting members on this board. From the non-voting members that join us, is there any opposing remarks that they would like to make with regard to these recommendations? No? Thank you. In which case, can I ask the board to endorse A, B, and C? I suppose we can take them on block. Any dissenting voices? I shall declare them carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much for the debate. It has been most illuminating. I hope everyone will agree. We should now move to agenda item 11, which is the ETROs and the active travel consultations thereon. There are some public questions to be taken on this as well. Are we saying goodbye to Mayor Dr. Nick? Thank you so much for participating today. It's been great to see you. And, oh, fabulous. More power to you, Mayor Dr. Nick. So, we have got Vilma, first of all, who I believe is reading out questions from Stephen and Linny.
Yes, Chair. The first question is from Stephen Hollis and reads as follows. Why has no consideration been given to the effect on traffic and pollution caused by residents and visitors having to drive around the closure areas in order to access the area from the other side? I now spend 10 minutes or more on Lensfield Road and Hills Road that I would not otherwise enter. This will become worse in winter and as more people stop working from home. Why has no consideration been given to the effect on businesses in the area by the disruption caused to customers visiting their premises? The current traffic issues are discouraging a lot of trade. Why has no proper consideration been given to emergency vehicles becoming stuck in gridlock traffic? No ambulance would be able to exit Newtown along Union Road from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. The gridlock traffic in front of it would not be able to get out of the way. And the following question is from Linny Purr. Data shows longer delays on side roads from displaced traffic from GCP modal filters. It is your duty to secure the expeditious movement of traffic on the authority's road network, respond to the climate crisis and Britain's targets of reducing emissions to 68% by 2030, 78% by 2035, and net zero emissions by 2050, safeguard people with protected characteristics and their important services, build back fairer and contribute to levelling up, protect businesses and the local economy, listen to citizens harmed rather than the politically organised vocal minority of the seemingly fanatical cycling lobby and self-interested residents' associations, oppose this crude government policy to enforce behaviour change that comes with the threat of risking losing central funding if not implemented. Closing roads is wonderful for improved air quality, active travel and increasing house prices within the private enclaves created for the privileged few who get quieter roads for themselves and their children. Families and children who live, cycle, walk, go to school and wait for buses along roads that take the displaced traffic are expendable for their greater good. So too are the elderly, disabled and those with mobility issues. Higher time and transport costs harm businesses, deliverers, doctors, district nurses, carers, social services, transport, taxis, etc. Even if some journeys evaporate, longer journeys and increased traffic in fewer roads creates congestion and more emissions than previously. Will the GCP re-examine road closures and stop modal filters, improve public transport and offer incentives to encourage more cycling and walking instead? Ensure free-flowing traffic, enabling necessary journeys to get to, through and round Cambridge, to cut emissions and aid the economy. Say no to government coercion. Give us justice and healthy and safe streets for all, not just the few. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Vilma. Now, do we have Robert in the room? Will you come forward and ask your question?
press this red button. Hopefully I can be heard. Hello, everyone. Thanks for giving me the chance to raise our question. I should say that up front, I'm representing over 50 residents and non-residents across Loire Road and Sedley Taylor and the wider area. The question relates to obviously the Loire Road Etro, and the GCP Joint Assembly meeting on Thursday 9th September unanimously agreed to recommend keeping the road closure permanent. The GCP Joint Assembly supported making the permanent closure, but to mitigate impacts on other roads, requested looking at undertaking of the traffic signals in the area. The question I'm going to raise, which is on the basis the officer's report states no negative evidence to support the proposal to rescind the current experimental order, and furthermore there is clear evidence the objectives have been met, as well as proven popularity of the scheme with residents and non-residents alike, what would be the justification for reopening the road and going against the unanimous decision made at the GCP meeting on September 9th? On whether the scheme should be retained across the Loire and Sedley Taylor, the scheme scored the highest acceptance rate across non-residents over residents. Both groups were overwhelmingly in favour, and the consultation results were not skewed by any sort of neighbourhood campaign. We urge the Executive Board to support the recommendation to make the Loire Road closure permanent, which received unanimous support at the Joint Assembly. Not to do so would make the roads less safe for cyclists and pedestrians. The officer's report states the scheme has been successful in improving walking and cycling and making the area safer, with this view based on 700 cycle trips per day. Now, I would like just refer to Appendix 1 in the paperwork. We did there was a survey carried out by the residents very recently to try and update the data on how many pedestrian cycle journeys were being taken along the roads. You can hopefully see the numbers there, that the number came through at 1,380 cycle trips on a single day, which compares to the 700 in the officer's report, which is almost 100% increase, and over 2,200 pedestrians accessed Loire and Sedley Taylor in a single day. This data surely supports the view that Loire and Sedley Taylor roads are simply not suitable nor safe to allow cars, vans and HGVs to use the road as a cut-through. Furthermore, listening to David Bajent's comments earlier, I think fundamentally it could be surmised that by changing the road structure and blocking traffic into the Loire and Sedley Taylor would actually encourage more cyclists and more pedestrians and more changing of positive behaviour. And lastly, I'd just like to add on that basis about personal behaviour. We talk about next generation, and again, it was eloquently put forward. My son used to cycle down Sedley Taylor Road and Loire to school. He goes to Morley Memorial. And before the road closure was put in place, due to a number of near misses with cars on the road and the level of traffic on the road, I had to make the decision to actually stop him cycling to school. This surely cannot be the right behaviour. It cannot be the future that we have a 10-year-old boy who I have to stop doing what is right for everybody for the nature of a very few people who want to have a faster route to a place which they should actually be using cyclists or cycling or public transport or walking. In the last 19 months, he's been able to cycle to school, when the schools have been open, of course.
Can I ask you just to wind up, please? Your time is up. Thank you.
That was my 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. Right, have we got Martin again? I believe the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to reiterate our support for these excellent schemes. We also welcome the Joint Assembly's recommendation to include Loire Road in the list of schemes to be made permanent. In fact, it would have been very odd to effectively add an official expansion of the main road network into a residential street, so this is a very sensible change. In fact, the vast majority of streets in Cambridge already do not permit through traffic, and there are hundreds of modal filters already existing since the 1980s. Once in, these are popular, and no one argues to remove them. The data shows that all the GCP's experimental active travel schemes have been successful, with routes rebalancing transport in favour of walking and cycling, and the majority of respondents to the consultation agreeing that these areas are safer and more pleasant in terms of noise, pollution and general ambience. And we've heard from residents who we know really welcome these. We support further work by the GCP and its partners to improve the schemes where necessary and design and implement permanent layouts. So our question is, given the success of these experimental schemes, what further work is the GCP doing to build on and extend this project? The County Council's consultation website on the second phase of active travel schemes says that projects relating to initial ideas for the Cambridge Historic City Centre, Victoria Avenue, Grange Road and Sidgwick Avenue are being considered separately by the GCP. So our question is, what's the status of this work? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. I believe that is all in terms of questions from the public. Peter, would you like to answer?
Thank you, Chair. I'll do my best. So in terms of Stephen Hollis's question, the ETRO report does recognise displacement takes place. It's perhaps notable that in similar schemes where assessments have been made across the UK, actually displacement diminishes over time. But these issues have been assessed, they are replayed and outlined in the report, and they are given due weight when considered with the benefits that we've heard in terms of pedestrians and cyclists on the affected streets. A public consultation was held for both stages of the Newtown scheme, and information was hand-delivered to all premises, both residences and businesses in the affected area. And I'm happy to report that we had discussions with the emergency services during and throughout these pilot projects, and indeed the emergency services have the keys to unlock the padlocks on these obstacles should they require access at certain times of the day. Turning to Linny Purr's question, I mean, I referred to some of this earlier on. We're doing an awful lot in terms of active travel. So whether it's greenways, whether it's looking at Cycling Plus, whether it's Chisholm Trail. And so we are committed to taking this agenda forward. Modal filters are a small part of that. And they're a small part of what we're discussing hitherto, which is the city access agenda, which has a number of constituent elements. We have supported the County Council's efforts on this. We have adhered to government policy on this, and we will continue to do that. Ensuring free-flowing traffic in the city is an interesting one, because the only way of doing that is actually to reduce traffic levels. And that may well lead us back to the conversation that you've just had, Chair, in terms of city access. In terms of Robert Rawlinson's points, then clearly they're reflected in the recommendations for the board around Luard Road, so probably not worth me saying any more. Leave it for the board for them to consider. And then finally, in terms of Martin's questions, we are continuing to work with the County Council in terms of ETROs, in terms of city access agenda, and particularly around the network review. And I think you got a promise out of me earlier on for a consultation in the relatively early part of 2022, and I'm sure it will be picked up during that consultation, Chair.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that. Before I take Councillor Bick, would you like Peter to introduce the report before you like we did before? Excellent. In which case, Peter, it's you again.
Well, thank you, Chair. I mean, I'll be brief. ETRO programme came forward following the very strange events that we've been experiencing over the last 12, 18 and 24 months, coming out of Department for Transport requirements. We've been supporting the County Council on delivering this agenda, which is why the recommendations in front of you today are to make recommendations to the County Council in terms of their Highways and Transport Committee will be the final decision maker. It is not yourselves on this occasion. We identified the 6 schemes that are listed. We undertook the consultation in accordance with requirements that we're obliged to undertake. We've weighed the assessment in terms of the benefits and the disbenefits of these schemes. and they're outlined in paragraph 2.1. The change that has been alluded to by Mr. Rawlinson in his question to Luard Road followed the discussion that was had at the Joint Assembly, and that is outlined as part of the recommendations to you, Chair. So maybe I'll stop there and answer any questions if there are any.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So we shall open the debate. Shall we start with Councillor Bick?
Thanks, Chair. The Assembly supported making 5 of the 6 schemes permanent in line with the officer's recommendations: Carlisle Road, Newtown, Nightingale Avenue, Silver Street and Stories Way. And it would want me to highlight to you the important supplementary points that go with some of those. Mitigation on Queen Edith's Way, on streets neighbouring Carlisle Road, and the further supporting fine-tuning work for Newtown, including work with schools that generate transport there. We debated the officer's recommendation at the stage it stood when it came to us, which was to rescind the Luard Road scheme, and we unanimously concluded to recommend to the board to make it permanent too. Our feeling was that schemes such as these are almost certainly going to result in some degree of displacement, that other measures in relation to the traffic lights could still be taken to alleviate any issues on Long Road, and that benefits experienced by the restoration of the 2 residential streets should not be lightly withdrawn given the widespread support for them. And we would see our city access strategy that we debated as the last item as the tool to reduce car journeys across the city, and that Long Road would undoubtedly benefit from that too, underlining yet again why it's so important to get on with that scheme to free up the possibility for these type of schemes as we go forward. So we're pleased to see that the recommendation before you today on Luard Road has been changed, and we would therefore urge you to support all of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. Any members of the board wish to say anything about the recommendations in front of us? Is that David? Andy, I am so sorry. I can't read from here, and I've moved on from my notes.
So a bit like
Andy,
David.
please go first.
That's all right. So thank you. I think it's difficult not to support the recommendations. There's clearly a safety issue on many of these roads, and as we've seen, it's promoting active transport. As you know, I always have a half glass empty, half glass full type approach to this. This idea that somehow we're moving traffic to main roads and that's a good thing. For those of us who aren't as familiar with Cambridge, we'll know that the main roads in Cambridge are really just residential roads, which are a bit sort of straighter and perhaps are not quite as narrow as some of the other roads. Why we claim we have a ring road in Cambridge is beyond me. They're roads that say ring road on them, but they're still residential roads. So I guess my concern is, and perhaps a reassurance from officers, that as we move through the larger scale on the city access study, that it's not an intention to cause gridlock on the roads, by displacing traffic, we're not going to end up with a situation for the next 2 or 3 years where it's gridlock everywhere. And as we go through that city access study, we're thinking about the implications along the way, with the ultimate aim of reducing car usage, as Dave said. But we don't want residential streets effectively blocked whilst we're going through that process.
Excellent, thank you very much. Would you like to go next, or shall I call? Yeah, I suppose I can do that. Would you like to?
I'm happy to give that reassurance. Yeah. I mean, the issue around city access is reducing traffic. It is not displacing traffic. And that is a fundamental difference. And that's why the exam question's slightly different. So whilst ETROs have a role, it is part of the solution. It is not the solution itself.
Makes sense. Phil, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Just a quick point. I find that Martin again has asked my question for me. I mean, this set of schemes, I think, has been one of the most successful that we've done. It was quick, it was cheap, it was effective, and it was popular. So the question, my question, along with Martin's, is why aren't we doing some more?
That's a very good question. Peter, would you like to comment?
So the County Council has recently consulted on a second wave of ETROs. We're in conversations with them as to how many could be reasonably delivered that would meet the criteria that you've just outlined in terms of timeliness, but also in terms of popularity and impact on the network. There is a cumulative issue we need to be conscious of, going back to the point that Andy raised around displacement vis-a-vis traffic reduction. So those conversations are ongoing. I expect that to continue with county colleagues, and it will continue to feed into your considerations on city access.
Yeah, if I can make a comment on that as well. I mean, it's great to identify those things that we can do now in that sense, but the longer you go on, the longer you need to start looking at the bigger picture and do something else. There aren't that many roads in Cambridge you can shut before it becomes a nightmare if you don't do something else, which I presume will be what's going to keep us occupied for the next couple of years, which we look forward to. Neil, did you have any comments?
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment which relates to Mr. Rawlinson's question, his statement, which obviously addresses the benefits of the scheme for the immediate residents in Luard Road and Sedley Taylor Road and the 50 you're representing. You made the points very well, particularly around the safety of cycling. I just want to make a point from the GCP's perspective on this, and you can tell what the bias is in trying to promote active travel from this group. But what's really important is that, your points apply to the scheme which directly affects those 50 residents in Luard Road and Sedley Taylor Road. But it also applies to all the other 6 schemes too as well, which will also promote those residents when they cycle in other parts of Cambridge in terms of improving their safety and the convenience. And we need to hear that voice more broadly as well. So, often we just hear it from the perspective of the people who are directly affected by some of the things which GCP is doing. And we don't hear from people who are indirectly affected or more broadly affected. So I thank you for you asking your question. I would just encourage you, sir, in future to come back and promote and speak in favour of other schemes which may not affect Luard Road or Sedley Taylor Road, would also contribute to a broader base of safe cycling and encouragement of active travel in the city. So thank you. I hope you don't think I'm picking on you. I'm just actually want to take your positive comments and sort of broaden them into a much greater domain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil, for that. Is there any other comments from anybody else? Austin?
I think just to say, I listened intently to the Joint Assembly debate on this with great interest, and one of my takeaways, I was very pleased, and I think officers should be complimented on their listening around the issue of the Luard Road and having the confidence to say that we could find a way forward with that, with a relatively small amount of funding, I'm sure, to solve that problem. Suffice that we're here today to vote to take that forward, hopefully. Thank you. Absolutely,
and thank you very much for all the work that has been done on this. It's very gratefully acknowledged by all of us. If there are no more comments, I think we can sum up and go to the vote. So as has been mentioned before, these recommendations that we are going to vote on shortly are going to go as recommendations to the County Council's Highways and Transport Committee, which I believe will meet in November. This isn't the most efficient way of doing this, which is why I'm hoping that, we can have some conversations ongoing for the future, so that future projects such as these only need to go somewhere once. But for the purposes of progressing these, the recommendations are quite a long list. We've got A to O, and they refer to Carlisle Road, Luard Road, Newtown, Nightingale Avenue, Silver Street, Stories Way, and there is an additional recommendation which to support joint work with the County Council on designing and implementing permanent layouts for those closure points, with the GCP providing funding. So, as usual, shall I go to the non-voting members of the board first? If you have any dissenting comments, can you please make them now? In which case, does the board agree that we should endorse these recommendations?
Agreed.
I shall therefore declare those agreed unanimously. Thank you very much, again, for an excellent debate, which means we are now going back to item 9 on your agenda, which is the GCP Quarterly Progress Report, which we delayed until now, and we should now take it. So first, shall we go to the public questions again, which means Martin, please come forward.
Hello again. Thank you, Chair. Council would like to thank officers for the response to the questions on this topic we asked at the Joint Assembly. We have one more query on the implementation of cycling projects. We know from the Government's Gear Change report that building up the active travel capabilities of local government will be an important focus of the new funding body and inspectorate, Active Travel England. With this in mind, why have the GCP chosen to relinquish the expertise of the county's in-house cycle projects team staff? In February 2020, you told us that the GCP was committed to employing the appropriate expertise with the local knowledge to deliver cycling projects internally. With an increased number of schemes planned for the future, we believe it's essential to retain and build on this team of locally based experts who have the everyday cycling experience to truly understand the needs of Cambridgeshire communities and ensure that schemes are considered in the round, e.g. to ensure the needs of pedestrians and those with disabilities and businesses are properly considered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Peter, I believe this is all the questions. Would you like to answer?
I'll give the go, Chair. I think I'm happy to reaffirm my commitment that the Greater Cambridge Partnership will employ people with expertise and local knowledge on our projects. I suppose I would add a comment that says there's more of these projects across the wider Cambridgeshire, and we need to continue to work closely with our partners to do that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you, Martin, for your contributions throughout the meeting. It's been very good to have you here. So before we go to Councillor Bick, would we like to have the introduction from Niamh at this point? I don't think Councillor Bick had comments on this item. Oh, excellent. In which case we can go to Niamh.
Thank you, Chair. So just to introduce my colleague Dan Clark, who's just next to Tim there. He's here to pick up any questions around the SMART programme, should the board have any. You'll see that we've got one substantive item at 1.2 on the report in front of you that we're asking you to approve today. Just ahead of running through that, I wanted to draw your attention to something and some of the kind of specific work around skills that's been going on. You'll see it in Appendix 2 in Section 12. Last time the board met, actually, the new skills contract that we launched was only just underway, and really we couldn't give you a sense of how it's going because it was in its infancy. So I wanted to give you a brief update on a sense of how that's going. So despite kind of the contract running through the summer period and all the challenges that COVID has brought, you'll see fairly good progress against the targets, I think, on the report in there. We can already see apprenticeship starts, for example, as a direct result of the service, which is really good news given the circumstances we're operating within. And there's employers taking up support that Form the Future and the Regional College are offering, which is also testament to all the hard work that they're putting in, really. There's obviously really significant challenges around skills and recovery. I absolutely don't want to undermine that, but in terms of this piece of work and how that's going and linking up across the geography, it's a positive picture, just to mention that. So before we run through each section, Chair, I'll take you back to the substantive recommendation, which is a proposal for a sensor network, which is detailed down the paper on section 14.8. Just to briefly kind of talk you through what that is. So what officers are recommending to the board is that you approve a request to support the first stages of a network of traffic sensors to be installed at strategic locations across the Greater Cambridge geography. Really, what the substantive part of what this is about is preparing for the GCP's next Gateway Review, which is coming much quicker than probably any of us imagined after the last one. So that gets underway, or rather will be completed by 2025, with work underway before that to prepare for it, which this is part of. As part of that work, we need to be able to demonstrate the impact of what we're doing. So the previous Gateway Review looked at, progress, how we were getting on. But really, this next stage is to look at what we've done and what our impact is. And we need to be able to provide a kind of rich set of information to support that work. So one part of that is getting this data and getting much better, richer data than is currently available. What this approach moves away from is the kind of current process of gathering data as we do on a kind of annual basis. This will provide separate counts of cars, of cycles, of pedestrians, and a range of other vehicle types. And as I said, it will cover kind of strategic cycle and pedestrian paths across the geography, which is, of course, important for our review. So just in terms of timescales and subject to views, of course, from the board, we're proposing to have gone through the relevant procurement process this autumn, with the installation next spring and full running of the sensor network by the summer 22. So I'll leave it there, Chair, and happy to run through the report, take any questions as you wish to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niamh, for that introduction. So as you can see from your papers, we have got a number of work streams through which this discussion is structured. So we've got, starting on page 58, you've got your transport work stream. Page 64 is your skills work stream. Then there's a smart work stream, which includes the traffic sensor that we've been discussing, which is on page 67. The housing work stream is on page 71, and the economy and environment work stream from page 73. So I shall open this up for debate. We can start with transport, but basically anything you want, really. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Anything at all? Excellent, in which case, I was going to make just two really quick points. Like, number one, I think this whole idea of basing the next phase of our work on collecting data is a very, very good idea, and is exactly what we should be doing. So I hope that it will be no problem for us to, support this with the sensors that we need. And I was going to point out, when I was looking at the papers on the economy and environment work stream, I think there was a very interesting bit. I'm never going to be able to find it now, but the growth in knowledge-intensive jobs, which was pointed out in the report, which was very interesting. And because we've got a housing work stream as well, I was going to ask if there was any sort of prominence being given to the obvious link between the growth in that kind of jobs and the need for worker homes, and whether or not that's something that we're working with that in mind. I'm kind of hoping we are. So that was going to be my only comment. Is there anything on that, Niamh?
Yep, thanks, Chair. So just around the KI stuff, it's so interesting, and we'll get another update on that work in November. But as you'll read, it's really the KI stuff that's kind of kept this place buoyant, as we've seen in the last 18 months. In terms of making sure that those people that are so important to this economy have somewhere affordable to live, there's a range of work that's kind of been done in the past to look at the kind of tenure that might be required. And we've worked with colleagues at the City and South Cambs on the Greater Cambridge shared housing strategy work to try and make sure that that kind of idea of key worker is built in across jobs that are important to the economy and not just the kind of traditional key worker jobs, which are still important. In fact, I had a discussion with the planning team on the North West Cambridge AAP last week, just to make sure that we're building that in early to that process as well in terms of the strategy.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Any final comments from anyone? Going once, going twice? No. In which case, we've got recommendations A and B, which I hope we can just approve now. If there's any dissenting comments, can I have them now? Again, going once, going twice? No. In which case, the recommendations are passed unanimously, I think. Thank you very much for all that. Which brings us very neatly to, I believe, close to the end of our meeting. We have got item 12 on our agenda, which is to report that the next meeting will take place at 4 p.m. on Thursday, the 9th of December, with your usual attached deadlines for public questions and comments, etc., to which I very much look forward. Thanks, everyone, for your contributions today. It's been great. It's gone very, very well. I'm very pleased with the work that we're doing. I hope we can continue in the same spirit. And thanks very much, everyone.